get into the international crisis that is Israel-Palestine.
Yeah. So I think we should do this by kind of going through the bullets of what has happened, like in the most current events, and then we rewind all the way back to the past.
Okay.
And we work our way back. Okay. So unless you live under a rock, you know that about 2 weeks ago, Hamas invaded southern Israel from Gaza and had and made a massive attack on Israeli civilians. It was early in the morning of Saturday, October 7th. They struck Israel with missiles and invaded Gaza on the ground and in paragliders, killing over 1,400 Israeli citizens and taking many more hostage. So, of course, in response, Israel is hurt. It's furious. They start to bombard Gaza with airstrikes and missiles. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu tweets a crystal clear statement that Israel is at war with Hamas. There's no question of how strong the response is going to be. The next day, the Israeli government formally declares war and calls up over 360,000 reservists in its military. A few days afterwards, Prime Minister Netanyahu forms a national unity government with his chief rival, Benny Gantz, to preside over the conflict. Israel ramps up its embargo, its blockade of Gaza that it's had on since 2007. The defense minister, Yoav Gallant declared that they're cutting off all supplies of food, water, and fuel until Israeli hostages were freed. Evidence comes out that Israel is bombing the very corridors of escape that it is encouraging the Gazan citizens to take, supposedly because Israel only wants to attack Hamas and not Gaza. This past Saturday, I think it was about the 14th, when Israel orders an evacuation of northern Gaza, where 1.1 million people live, implying it's about to invade on the ground. This has enormous humanitarian consequences because these people take Israel very seriously, and enormous numbers do start moving to the south of the Gaza Strip. The UN and other international organizations plead that Israel withdraws this warning because of the humanitarian crisis. Hamas responds and orders people to stay, citing that it's psychological warfare from Israel. It doesn't really matter. People run away nonetheless. By the end of the first week of the war, 1,900 Gazans have died because of Israeli airstrikes, and 7,700 have been injured. I don't even know what the death toll is at now.
It's double what you just said now, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's at like 5,000 dead or something like that.
Yeah. As Gazans try to escape, there's footage that shows evidence of the Israeli Defense Force committing war crimes, including airstrikes on medical vehicles. Meanwhile, there are fears of the conflict kind of leaking out and becoming a larger one as minor conflicts start brewing at the Israel-Lebanon border, where Hezbollah presides and kind of rules over, and Hezbollah is a militant Islamic organization that is part of the Lebanese government. Recently, something that caught headlines was a hospital in Gaza being blown up, killing about 500 people was the initial estimate, but it's been revised down to probably between 1 and 300. Western sources are saying that the evidence points to it being a Hamas missile strike that blew up the hospital. Hamas hasn't produced any evidence to back up its claim that Israel blew up the hospital. And now, really, things are not at a standstill. Israel airstrikes are ramping up even further. Just yesterday, Israel was said to have attacked 400 targets. The day before, it was 320. So it's rising fast. It's killing hundreds of Gazan citizens every day. And it is just waiting on a ground invasion because of some requests from Western allies that want a little bit more time to deal with the hostages.
Yeah, because the Biden administration has said, like, we're not telling the Israeli government how to go about this, right? The Biden administration is like, they're asked, are you telling them to delay? Biden administration is like, no, we're not telling them to delay. We're not doing that at all. We're just asking them to make sure they really thought out everything. From my perspective, that's them asking them to delay.
Yes, they are.
The Biden administration, the Western forces are trying to ask them to delay. And I think that's, for the better. The more we can delay this is the more likelihood that cooler heads prevail.
Yeah.
And this doesn't explode into a larger conflict than it needs to be. Because Israel is rightfully angry. Israel is rightfully angry, and they want to wipe Gaza off the map. They really do. They want Hamas destroyed at all costs.
Yeah.
And, you can see the Israeli Twitter account is gross. So it just really is. The United Nations tweeted, like, even rules has war. And then
Even war has rules.
Even war has rules. And then Israel responded, like, even Israel can defend itself. And it's like, why did you say that? Like, what the hell? Why would you say that in response to that? Why can't you just say, yeah, you're right, war does have rules? There's reports that Israel has been hitting a spot and then waiting for the first responders to come and then hit it again to try to kill the first responders. Look, I don't want to be spreading Hamas propaganda. I don't want to do that. So I don't want to say anything that I don't really want to say things that I can't confirm, I guess, because the fog of war is thick. But what I do know is that this struggle and this fight and the terrorism that Hamas committed against Israel, it didn't just come out of nowhere. It started a long, long time ago. Not saying that any of the Israelis that were killed deserved any of this, because they didn't. Hamas was disgusting for what they did. It's not equivocal. It's not. You can't even debate it. They're a disgusting terrorist organization that are not justified in killing civilians, because killing civilians is never justified under any circumstance. Okay, but I do think it's important that we go over the history of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and if I could go through a little timeline here, just kind of telling how we got here. It's a kind of a long story, but it's important if we want to talk about this, it's important to know it.
Yeah. I mean, this is our deep dive.
Yeah. So let's start with let's just go over how Israel was formed. So for the majority of modern history, the Ottoman Empire controlled the Levant. So Levant is like Syria, Lebanon, modern day Israel, down to Saudi Arabia and all that stuff. So that's like the Levant area. Okay. Between 1882 and 1903, the Russian government was basically committing its own proto-Holocaust against its Jewish population. There were massive amounts of pogroms, and a lot of Jews were being murdered. Think of it like, black men getting lynched in the United States. So 35,000 Jews fled Russia and went to Palestine between 1882 and 1903. In this time period, 1.5 Jews came to America.
1.5 million.
1.5 million Jews came to America, not 1.5 Jews. That'd be fucked up. What's interesting is, I didn't know this, but Russia had half of the world's Jews at this time.
That's crazy.
Isn't that nuts?
Yeah. I don't know why.
Now they don't have like almost any.
Damn.
Which is because of this. Because they all left. Now that's why America has such a large Jewish population. So now this is also important. After the Ottomans captured Yemen at the end of the Arabian Peninsula, all the Jews in Yemen moved to Palestine. So we start seeing this process. Russian Jews are moving to Palestine. Yemenis Jews are moving to Palestine. Russian Jews created a group called the Lovers of Zion, and this was a movement to get Jews to move to Palestine. They want to move to Palestine because it's the area of their homeland. It's the nation of Canaan, the state of Israel from the Bible, all that stuff. They want to go back there. And if you're being persecuted everywhere else, it makes sense that you want to go back there. No one's stopping them. You can move to the Ottoman Empire. It's not illegal.
Yeah.
You're allowed to move there. It's fine.
And seemingly they're getting persecuted less there. So.
Way less there, right?
Yeah.
So Theodore Herzl published The Jewish State, in which he asserted that the solution to the solution to growing anti-Semitism in Europe would be for the Jews to have their own state away from Europe. We're getting into that. We're getting into the Nazi time, guys. We're getting there. So now World War I breaks out. This gave Britain control of the region during the peace negotiations.
Because, importantly, the Ottoman Empire ended at the end of World War One.
Yeah, Ottoman Empire is gone.
Yeah.
Okay, defeated, gone. So now they get to cut it up, and the League of Nations gives the United Kingdom dominion over the land called Mandatory Palestine, and Mandatory Palestine is like modern day Jordan plus modern day Israel. That's Mandatory Palestine. And this is around the time when the Balfour Declaration of 1917 comes, where the British government officially recognizes that it wants to create a Jewish state. This happens in 1917, before the Mandatory Palestine. So we have the Balfour Declaration, and then we have the Mandatory Palestine being given dominion to the United Kingdom. Okay. Now, the Russian Civil War breaks out. 100,000 Jews die, and 600,000 refugees flee Russia. Many of these people went to Palestine. So now we see another increase of Jewish population in Palestine. Arabs are getting mad at this, and they're getting mad at Western imperialism for being in their country or their region. Country is a hard word here because I don't know if country is the right word.
No, I think region makes sense.
Yeah. The Arabs begin to fight back, and Jews were caught in the crossfire. Anti-Semitic, anti-Jewish riots start breaking out in Jerusalem. U.S. Immigration Act of 1924 really drives down Jewish acceptance into the United States. The Immigration Act of 1924 started mandating what percentage of ethnicities the United States would be taking in. Jews were hurt there, so Jews can no longer enter the United States. So Arab and Jewish things start going up. They start fighting over the Wailing Wall. Now Nazi Germany comes to power. During the early reign of the Nazi era, Nazis would give Jews the option to have all of their possessions confiscated, and then they would ship them off to Palestine with nothing. This happened for about 50,000 Jews were able to get out of Nazi Germany this way. So now we can see here 33% of Palestine by the end of World War II were Jews. 33% of the region. Arab revolts are breaking out, and we have some Jews who are pacifists and some Jews who are not pacifists. So the Pillay Commission this is in the British government, looked to create a Jew-only zone that would move 250,000 Arabs out of the area. Well, Palestinian Arabs completely rejected that and went into massive revolt. This was only kind of ended when the White Paper of 1939 was released, and they said that one state should be made jointly ruled by Arabs and Jews. Both Jews and Arabs rejected this, but it ended this era of revolt. This is an important moment because at this moment, both sides say that they don't want to live in the same state. This makes it really, really hard here. Both the Jews and the Arabs reject the White Paper of 1939. With that, it kind of locks them into a perpetual war for dominance forever. There's really no other way out except for a two-state solution. But who's going to draw the lines? Well, by the end of World War II, we have some type of answer to this. We see a UN solution proposed that would create a Jewish state and a Palestinian state. Okay? And with this, the Jews were happy and the Arabs were not. The Jews were very, very satisfied with this and were willing to accept this solution. The Arabs were not. So on May 14th, 1948, on the day the last British forces left, the Jewish People's Council gathered at Tel Aviv Museum and proclaimed the establishment of the Jewish State of Israel. So this is May 14th, 1948. At that moment, the Soviet Union and the United States both recognized Israel. In response, Arabs of all countries, Egypt, Jordan, all of them, invaded from all sides to defend the Palestinian Arabs' right to self-determination. Israel won this war, an armistice was signed, and the newly acquired territories from the Jews were not recognized by the Palestinian Arabs. So Israel gets formed through UN recognition. The British pull out, and immediately the Arabs reject the United Nations proposal after the Soviet Union and the United States, the two major powers, both recognize Israel's existence, and immediately the Arabs invade.
And Israel wins.
Yeah. Really kind of setting the tone for the rest of the 100 years.
Yeah, and totally. I mean, not just that Israel wins, but also that Israel knows that it can win and that it remains in the crosshairs of the Arab world that it is surrounded by.
Mm-hmm. Now, I want to stop here for a second and pause before we get into really modern history here, because this is where a lot of the issues kind of arise from the Western left's perspective. We have an issue in the Western left right now because the Western left believes that Israel is a settler colonial state that has no right to exist, that it's a settler colony, that the Western nations moved people in, drew lines on a map, and dictated how these countries would form. Now, I have issues with that interpretation because this wasn't drawn by Western influences. This was drawn by the UN.
Mm-hmm. Well, which is Western influenced heavily.
I suppose, but I think...
Especially at this time.
Yeah,
right?
Sure. But what do you think about that settler colonial statement?
I think that might be technically true, but I think it might be a rare instance where it's okay. But like they don't have anywhere to go, and they are persecuted everywhere they go. And even in this place where it is like their biblical homelands kind of, and they're not committing violence. They're just trying to find a place where they can live amongst other people like them. They are being attacked.
Especially in this moment. In this moment, they're not committing violence. And I think that's important.
Yes.
Right?
Exactly. And so like it makes sense in this moment to give them a place where they will have a government that is specifically chosen by them and meant to protect them.
And because I have an issue with ethno-states across the board.
Yeah.
I would never suggest that there should be a black state in America, ever. Or, an exclusively white state. I would never suggest something like that. Mm-hmm. So Israel is my test because Israel's an ethno-state.
Yes.
Am I going to be for an ethno-state? When your ethnicity is persecuted by everybody and you've been holocausted, yes.
Well,
I think that's fair.
Well, okay, let's say before the Civil War in the U.S., there was a proposal for a black ethno-state.
Yes.
I'd be for that.
I would be for that. Easily.
Right? Like
Easily.
I talk about this a lot, but sometimes politically it's not smart or right to argue only on a basis of principle.
Yeah.
It's about what is actually going to create the best solutions for the people involved, and in this case, for the people being oppressed.
Yes. Sometimes results matter more than ideology.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And this is one of those cases where...
At this point,
right now...
1948.
I don't believe Israel has done anything wrong. Up until 1948,
no.
We had Jews who naturally immigrated there over the course of 50 years because of 70 years, because of outside persecution. Mm-hmm. They were looking for a place to find home. The Ottoman Empire was actually relatively good for religious minorities compared to other European countries, that's for sure.
Yeah.
So they went there in the hopes of getting some type of freedom, and eventually 33% of this region became Jewish. When you're drawing the lines on the map here, especially in the age... especially in the age of like self-determination, this is the moment for nations like this to happen. That's how we have the Czech Republic and Slovakia, right? Mm-hmm. And that's how we get those nations. And the nation of Poland, it's because we said that the Polish people have a right to self-determination. And I think that I wouldn't agree with something like that in this moment of history, but in that moment of history, it makes total sense.
Yeah.
And even Marx was in favor of national revolutions in a lot of ways. And Karl Marx was very much in favor of the Irish national revolution. He was in favor of a lot of the Germanic national revolutions in the 1848 revolution. So it's not an anti-leftist thing to say, like, I'm for some national revolutions at specific points in history because they drive historical progress, right? And historical progress, I mean like a movement towards more liberty, a movement towards, a more egalitarian society. So by 1948, that's where we are. And I don't really have too much sympathy at this point for the Arab side at all.
No.
Because right now, to me, they only seem like the aggressor.
I agree.
It seems like we had an international compromise signed on by the UN, the Soviet Union, and the United States, and then the Arabs said no and attacked to kill them.
Yes. Well, it's kind of reminiscent of the hatred that some immigrants get in the U.S. now, right? It's like they have space, right? They're not harming people in any way, but it's just because they're people that came from somewhere else that aren't exactly like us culturally.
Yeah. So now Israel goes on existing for a while, and then we have the 6-Day War of 1967. Arabs invade again. Egypt moves in from Sinai. We have Jordan and Syria moving in from the east. We have Lebanon moving in from the north. And on May 26, Nasser, the president of Egypt, said, "The battle will be a general one, and our basic object will be to destroy Israel." You can't really get more blatant than that. Well, Israel won, and they won fast in these 6 days. They were able to gain control of the Sinai Peninsula, the Gaza Strip, the Golan Heights of Syria, formerly Jordanian-controlled West Bank of the Jordan River. East Jerusalem was also annexed.
Yeah.
Again, Arabs attacked, and the Jews repelled them.
Yeah. I think this is a place where I want to jump in real quick, because this was a turning point, not just for the territorial gains of Israel, but also in U.S.-Israeli relations.
True.
So this is an important moment where I want to jump in on Israel relations with the U.S., because before the 6-Day War, the two countries were, they had some interaction. Obviously, the UN, the U.S. is a big part of, and the UN did try to create Israel as a country, but then something different is happening in 1967 when the 6-Day War occurs. There's a fear when it breaks out that the Soviet Union is going to be aligned with the Arab countries, and its influence is going to spread by crushing Israel as all of these countries invaded at the same time. The U.S. is stretched because it's currently in Vietnam fighting that proxy war, and it doesn't really have the resources to spare to help in Israel. But then Israel wins, and the U.S. takes notice, and it's like, oh, shit, they can really handle themselves. This is a valuable ally to have. And so since then, the relationship has developed, and they got much closer, and there's been more coordination on defense, and we've given a lot of military aid and sold some of it to Israel. And this was kind of just a big jumping off point for that relationship.
That's super important to talk about Israel's role in the Cold War of being a bulwark against Soviet expansion into the Arab world, really.
Yeah.
Right. And then this Arab-Israeli conflict obviously just continues to keep heating up. And we get into October 6th of 1973, where the Yom Kippur War begins, where Syria and Egypt both attack Israel on the same day by surprise because it's a Jewish holiday, and Israel won again. A UN armistice was put in place. One thing that's important to note here is that the Labor Party is still in power. in Israel at this point. The right wing of Israel has never been in power yet. They have never won an election of 1973. Has never happened. Also notable, after this war, the Yom Kippur War, after it's over, November 1974, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, the PLO, was granted observer status at the United Nations. So this is the UN really, really trying to keep to their original proposal of 1948. They're really trying. Now they're like recognizing the Palestinian Liberation Organization. They're letting them have observer status. They're not saying that, they're not calling them like a country yet.
Yeah.
Because to do that, the Palestinian Liberation Organization would have to, accept the existence of Israel's current borders.
Yes. And that was never going to happen.
That was never going to happen.
Yeah.
So in 1977, the right takes power for the first time, and things start heating up. Egypt recognizes Israel, which is a massive step for peace. This was orchestrated by Jimmy Carter. It was one of his most amazing foreign policy achievements. In response to this, and this is what I think is very, very interesting, in response to Egypt recognizing Israel, Lebanese Palestinians, so you can think of this as like pre-Hezbollah, committed the Coastal Road Massacre in opposition to the Egyptian-Israeli peace process. So this killed 30-something Jewish people, and the Palestinian Liberation Organization took up positions in south of Lebanon and attacked Israel from there. An Israeli ambassador was almost assassinated, which caused the Israelis to invade southern Lebanon in 1982. So this is the first time where the Israelis are really, really invading their nations first, right? One of their ambassadors to Lebanon was almost assassinated, and in response, the Israelis invade Lebanon.
Yeah. And I'm sure a big part of this is, one, due to Israel being encouraged that it has just won the Six-Day War in 1967. It won the Yom Kippur War in 1973. It's like, okay, we have some military capability. We can invade. Plus, it has been aligned more with the big, bad U.S. and the Western powers.
Yep. When they invade southern Lebanon, it actually doesn't go well for them. And Israel ends up losing this war. Losing is a strong word, but they don't make the progress that they wanted to. And eventually, they pulled out, but they kept a small force there that was stationed there until like May 2000. So they were occupying southern Lebanon for a very, very, very long time. So that is like that's basically like the military stuff that's going on here. So to put things in perspective, at this point, we're in the year 2000, okay? We're getting to really modern history. I'm born by this point. Israel is occupying Gaza, right? Israel is occupying the West Bank of Jordan, pretty much, okay? This is when we have the first intifada. So Israel has been sending settlers to Gaza and the West Bank since 1948 now. Now, this is where I have an issue with the state of Israel. You signed up for the 1948 borders. You agreed to the 1948 borders. You championed the 1948 borders. You founded your country based upon the 1948 borders. And your decision to send settlers into Gaza and into the West Bank, areas you knew were not in your UN charter, was a mistake. And it was a blatant power grab.
Yeah.
Because they want to be able to use the logic of, oh, look, now there's Jews over there. We need that land too.
Yeah.
Oh, there's Jews over there. We need that land too. And
it's not okay.
They're taking advantage of a process that was meant to give an oppressed people peace. Yes. Right?
Yeah. And they're taking advantage of that to become oppressors themselves.
Yes. Which is insanity. But like on the other end, if the Palestinians are never going to give them peace, what's their incentive?
Of course.
Right? They declare their state in 1948 and then they get invaded and almost killed, right?
Yeah.
So
well, there is a constant, like, you can understand from the Israeli perspective, there's a constant anxiety. We're hated. They want to attack us. They want to destroy the idea and the presence of a Jewish state. So I would assume the thought process, the feeling is, we're playing offense as defense.
Yeah. But now there's also this religious component for the settlements, that they want to control the land of Canaan for religious reasons. I'm not an expert on, Jewish religion or whatever, but I'm pretty sure for like Christian or Jewish religions or stuff like that, when the Israeli people occupy the land of Canaan again, the Messiah will come or something like that.
Okay.
There's something along those lines. And I'm not a religious scholar. That's not, I could barely talk about politics. But anyway, there's another religious element to this. And the settlers who go into the West Bank and go into Gaza, especially today, are the most religious zealots of them, right? They are the most fundamentalist Orthodox Jews.
Yeah.
So in this first Intifada is what we were talking about. So we have Israeli settlers in Gaza, Israeli settlers in the West Bank. We have economic opportunity to Palestinians being few and far between, which is brewing this mass of resentment. Obviously, the biggest the best fuel for hatred is unemployment.
Yeah.
Because people are bored and they feel like their lives can't get better. Right? So at this moment, we start seeing the rise of Hamas, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, Islamic Jihad. All of these groups are launching attacks on Israel. Now, it's interesting that I don't know enough. I don't know everything. I'm not an expert. Okay. So when I read about this, it said Hamas, PLO, Islamic Jihad launched attacks on Israel. That's what I read in an article about the first Intifada. Okay.
Okay.
And then I looked up casualty statistics. And the first line about the casualty statistics are, in the first year in the Gaza Strip, 142 Palestinians were killed, no Israelis died. Does that make sense?
No.
It doesn't make sense. I don't know what happened. I can't say what happened, but it's weird to me that like I'm getting some sources saying Hamas and the PLO launches an attack, and then in the first year, 142 Palestinians die and 0 Israelis.
Yeah, that is weird. And I'm skeptical about saying anything about it because I don't understand.
Yeah, I don't understand. So I needed to say that at least. Okay.
Yeah.
So now we have on October 8th, 1990, we have 22 Palestinians killed by Israeli police during the 1990 Temple Mount killings at Al-Aqsa. Now, Al-Aqsa is a very important Muslim temple. Muslim temple? Is that what they're called? Mosque.
Yeah.
A Muslim mosque in Jerusalem. Okay. The United States vetoed any attempt for the United Nations to condemn Israel's abuse of the Palestinians.
This starts a pattern.
So this is what's starting a pattern.
Yeah.
So now we're at the point where the Israelis are the top dog in the region. I think that's fair to say.
Yeah.
The Israelis are the ones with the power. Yeah. It has flipped. And and now it's important to see how they're going to wield that power. And the killing at Al-Aqsa and the UN's basically complete preparation to condemn Israel for the attack with the lone U.S. veto.
Yeah.
That's showing that Israel isn't being
held accountable. Yeah. It's condoned, it's enabled by the U.S. My interpretation of it is that the American government is afraid to condemn Israel because it's going to make us look bad because of how deep our involvement is with them. Right. And I think that's where the pattern is. I mean, we had similar statements after like a Jewish Palestinian skirmish in 2021 from Nancy Pelosi, where a ton more Palestinian civilians died, where it's like, Israel has the right to defend itself. And America just keeps repeating that line, even though it's past defending itself.
Right.
now.
Like Israel has the right to defend itself. Does Israel have the right to kill 22 Palestinians inside of a mosque? Probably not.
Yeah. Can we need...
No, it
yeah,
does not.
That's not
And we need to be able to
themselves.
say that.
Yeah.
By not saying that, it makes it so when Israel does defend itself, we don't believe you. If you call everything defending yourself, when you call 27 people or 30 something people dying from tear gas inhalation as defending itself, that's not defending itself. No. That's abuse of crowd control. Okay. So this pattern continues. We have lawyers in Gaza going on strike because they were protesting the inability to visit their clients. And in response, Israel detained the deputy head of the Lawyers Association and held him without trial for 6 months. There's no excuse for something like that.
No.
There's no excuse for that. And we need to be able to say that. PLO is eventually recognized by the United States. And here the PLO is calling for restoration of the 1947 borders. So it took about 50 years, but the PLO now says, okay, we're ready for the UN borders in 1947.
It's
a little too late, man.
It's so funny. And not funny, but like the problem is that there's the oppressor needs to be the one that says, let's restore these borders. And the oppressor never will because they don't have to.
Yep. And in 1947, the ones with all the power were the Arabs.
Exactly. And so that's why they would never say it then. And even if it ever got to a point where it felt 50-50, each side would think, oh, we have a chance to win here completely.
They would just kill each other.
Yeah. So it needs to be like 80-20, and the 80 side says, let's take these borders.
Yeah. Exactly.
And then it'll just never happen.
But this is a big moment for Palestinian liberation because the PLO is recognized by the United States. That's a big deal.
That is a big deal.
Now the next thing that really happens that changes almost everything is the Oslo Accords.
Yep.
So the Oslo Accords really upended everything, and it really presented this moment of opportunity that we hadn't seen before. It was like the best opportunity since Egypt recognized Israel. The PLO recognized the state of Israel. And Israel recognized the PLO as the representative of the Palestinian people. No more, no less. Pretty interesting language. Not say that, they had a state or anything, but he was a representative of the Palestinian people. Because of the Oslo Accords, we saw partial withdrawal from the Israelis from Gaza and Jericho, and even transferred power and authority and powers and responsibilities onto the Palestinian Authority. The PA, you'll most likely see them abbreviated in the news. There are self-governing authorities that start popping up in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. And this moment is where Hamas starts really becoming active. And Hamas starts suicide bombing inside of Israel because Hamas is now getting angry at the PLO. Because Hamas is frustrated that the Palestinian Liberation Organization has recognized the state of Israel. Because in Hamas's charter, understand the motives of Hamas. Hamas wants to destroy the state of Israel and kill all the Jewish people who live in Palestine.
Yeah.
There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it.
They are for genocide openly.
Openly. That's in their charter.
Yes.
Okay. So Hamas is angry that the more moderate wing of Palestinian liberation, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, which represents the Palestinian people at the UN and is considered to be the representative of the Palestinian people, is recognizing the state of Israel. So there is still progress here, though. In 2005, every single Jewish settler was evacuated from Gaza, some of them even forcibly. This was by the state of Israel itself, taking its people out of Gaza and putting them back in Israel. They did this forcibly. We're talking tens of thousands of people. That's a true step towards de-escalation, if I've ever seen it.
Yeah.
That's pretty intense. Disengagement from the West Bank was completed in September 2005, and military disengagement from the Northwest Bank was completed 10 days later. So we really saw a moment here where this could be over.
Moving in a very positive direction.
Yes.
Yeah.
2006, the people of Gaza hold their first legislative election. Yeah. And Hamas wins it. Hamas leaders rejected all agreements signed with Israel, refused to recognize Israel's right to exist, refused to abandon the terror tactics, and occasionally claimed that the Holocaust was a Jewish conspiracy to earn international sympathy. So this is disgusting, right?
This is really, it's just so sad and deflating to think about, because Hamas, and I read about this earlier today, people didn't agree with Hamas's like stated goals. It didn't agree with the Israel state not existing, and exit polls showed this. They didn't agree with genociding the Jews. People were upset at corruption. People had a problem with the amount of corruption that existed in the PLO. And there still does exist a lot of corruption in the PLO.
Sure.
They super overpay the highest ranking members. And of course, when people are in the kind of economic turmoil that the Gazans and the Palestinians in the West Bank have endured, then they see that all of a sudden, okay, we do have a governing body that's ruling over us, and yet they're hoarding all of the resources and all the opportunities for themselves. You get pissed at that. And Hamas ran on that. Hamas ran on that more than they ran on, we want to destroy the Jewish people. They ran on corruption is bad, and the PLO has a bunch of corruptions, and we aren't going to have that.
And Hamas also didn't start out as a militant group. Hamas started out, really did a lot of work for social welfare.
Yep.
And that's how they built so much goodwill with the community. They started delivering food. And guess what? If you're starving and you go to a voting booth, you're going to vote for the guy who gave you food.
Yeah, exactly.
But there's another side to this that it would be wrong to ignore. Israel funded the creation of Hamas.
Yep.
And Israel really helped create them. So Brigadier General Yitzhak Zegrev, whatever, Zegev, okay, he reports that he told the New York Times that Israel helped finance the Palestinian Islamist movement as a counterweight to the secularists and leftists of the Palestine Liberation Organization, the PLO. And the Fatah Party, which was led by a guy named Yasser Arafat, and he referred to Hamas as a creature of Israel. Oh, man. The retired brigadier general, he said this: the Israeli government gave me a budget, and the military government gives to the mosques.
Yeah.
So we have other Israeli religious officials that say Hamas, to my greatest regret, is Israel's creation. It's just not... They were doing this to hurt Palestinian unity and Palestinian solidarity by making them fight against each other.
Yeah, and Palestinian legitimacy.
Yeah.
Right? If they're led by a terrorist organization, it's a lot easier to say they don't have a right to exist. And it's so sad and disgusting, and makes this situation so complicated.
Right. Yes. And so this is in effect due to the hard right wing of the Israeli government looking to capture all of the land for themselves. And in order to do that, they could not allow the success of the Oslo Accords to continue. Because if they did, well, this is actually pre the Oslo Accords, or if we're talking 1980, where some of this funding gets started, this is pre-Oslo Accords, right? So they don't even know that this is going to be happening yet. So they're not aware that they're funding the people that will eventually want to genocide them. They don't know that. They just think that they're funding the Mujahideen to fight the Soviet Union the same way. You know what I mean?
Yep.
They don't know what they're doing, but it comes out to bite them. And they created the Hamas in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
So after Hamas takes over Gaza in 2007, the Israelis, in combination with Egypt, blockade the Gaza Strip. Egypt blockades the Gaza Strip because the founding members of Hamas were members of the Islamic Brotherhood, which operated inside of Egypt and caused terror throughout Egypt. And the Islamic Brotherhood guys got into Gaza Strip, and those are the guys who founded Hamas. So Egypt wanted nothing to do with them, and they did not want them back in the country.
Yeah. I think an important thing to say here is there was a civil war inside Gaza after Hamas won the elections because it militarily destroyed Fatah, the opposition party.
Right.
So now, of course, Gaza is ruled by Hamas, not democratically at all.
Not at all.
There's not been an election since.
So that's that. I hate seeing that. Like, they elected Hamas. Okay, they elected Hamas in 2006. Hamas did not get a majority of the vote. They only got 46% of the vote. They didn't even get a majority. After that, they killed their opposition. They canceled all future elections, and half of the people inside of Gaza are under the age of 18 who didn't get to vote in that election. You cannot reasonably say that they voted in Hamas. That's not fair. It's not fair.
No.
So with this blockade, this is very hard because by UN definition, by international law definition, a blockade is an act of war.
Yeah.
So
and Israel has always justified the blockade by saying if they don't blockade, then Hamas will be able to
get weapons.
Yes, collect enough resources to have more effective attacks on Israel.
Yes. And that kind of brings us to where we are now.
Yeah.
This is where we are in the modern day. Israel has continued to expand its settlements into the West Bank.
Yes.
And while they have removed their military from Gaza, they are still blockading it with Egypt. And what I think is so interesting about this moment that really, really rhymes with the moment in 1982 with the Lebanese peace agreement, where Saudi Arabian relations were really improving with Israel.
Yes.
And they were on their way to normalizing the same way that the Lebanese and the Israelis were on their way to normalizing in 1982. And because of that, I think Hamas saw this as an unacceptable occurrence and needed to strike. The same way that the Palestinians thought that way in 1982 with the Lebanese normalization.
Yeah, I think that and the West Bank settlements, along with the violence against Palestinians in the West Bank that has come with the rise since the end of last year of the most right-wing government, the most nationalist Zionist government in Israel that we've seen probably in 2 decades, to encourage that kind of behavior. This is not that anyone deserves it, but it is very likely that you are going to incur some kind of extremist reaction when you squeeze a people like this the way that Israel has done for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, like when you think like what they do with these settlements in the West Bank, right? They'll move families out there into what's supposed to be Palestinian land. And sometimes they'll wait for the Palestinian families to be on vacation or to leave their homes. Then they'll move in an Israeli family and throw all the Palestinian family stuff out in the street and just say, my home now. I mean, that's craziness.
Yeah.
That's craziness.
Yeah.
And, Israel is placing these settlements in very, very strategic locations to make it impossible to draw a Palestinian state out of the land that's left, right? They're like encircling Palestinian areas so that no cartographer can come in and say, oh, here's the Palestinian state, here's the Jewish state. It's like Jewish pockets all throughout the West Bank.
Yeah.
So you can't draw a map.
Yeah.
And, that also makes the Israelis get control of water supplies, shut off water to key locations to force Palestinians out of areas in the West Bank. We know that this stuff is happening. And
and we don't call it out. The U.S. government does not call it out. Still. And now, of course, something like this happens, and then we're just encouraged, right? We just look like we're more in the right, and we can continue to put everything on Hamas, or just avoid. We can continue to ignore any blame that Israel might have on its shoulders in these kinds of not even in this situation, but just in the grand scheme of these events taking place.
And right now, Saudi Arabia is pushing for the restoration of the 1967 borders. I think the PLO is now for the 1967 borders, not the 47, 67, from modern day. Okay, but now here's my problem. I don't even think it's possible. There are too many Jews in the West Bank.
So they would have to be moved, you're saying?
Yeah, hundreds of thousands of Jews would have to be moved out of the West Bank to make that happen. Hundreds of thousands. And that sucks because I don't want to justify a country purposefully sending people of their ethnicities into another country and then saying, oh, that's mine now. Like, imagine if Mexico did that. Imagine if Mexico puts a bunch of Mexicans into Arizona and then it's like, oh, wait, that's Mexico now. Bop, mine.
Yeah.
That's actually my rightful claim. It was my land first, technically.
Yeah.
Right?
But I agree with that. But then again, you were just talking about how Israel evacuated tens of thousands of people from Gaza when things were de-escalating. And
that's not 100,000. That's not 100,000.
True.
That's way different. It's just so much more people. And it's a more radicalized population, too.
Yes.
And it's a more, like, it's a more radicalized population than what it was.
Yeah. It's not, I think it's possible, but it's not feasible.
Because whenever we see population exchanges like that, trying to make these ethnic borders work, it never works. It ends up in genocide. Every time when we look at the partition of India, when we tried to have the Muslim area of India and the Hindu area of Israel, we gave Pakistan, Bangladesh, whatever, massive murders.
Yeah.
In the upper of 1 million people dying. That's what would happen in this type of
I think you're right.
population separation.
I have a little bit, I have some more on the more immediate.
Yeah, so let's get into the geopolitical of this. But before we go on to the geopolitical of this, I want to just talk about some polling that we have out of Israel and Gaza and the West Bank.
Sure.
Now, this is pretty surprising. So at least for me, I didn't know this. Okay, so in 2013, 74% of Arab Israelis favored a two-state solution. In 2013, 46% of Jewish Israelis favored this. By 2023, only 32% of Jewish Israelis want a two-state solution. That means they're in favor of a one-state solution.
Yeah.
I can tell you one thing: they don't want a one-state solution that's a secular one state.
Yeah.
They don't want a one-state solution that's Palestinians and Jews. They want their state.
Yeah.
Then we look at Palestinian support, Palestinian opinion. Now, polling in Palestine is a little hard, obviously, for clear reasons. But if we look at Gaza, 20% want some peaceful negotiations, 30% want some peaceful popular resistance, and a little over 50% want an armed struggle. This looks like two people that are just not interested in peace, man.
Yeah.
They don't look like they're interested
There's
in it.
too much
Animosity, hatred. There's too much history. And I want to be able to say, throw that history away. Look at today. Call for a ceasefire right now. I mean, I would. If I was in any position of power at all, I would call for a ceasefire immediately.
Yeah. We get to say that because we're not in it.
Right.
Right. And that's, I mean, I want you to continue with the rest of the
No, I'm done. It's just now that this conflict looks like it's boiling over and there's consequences to that geopolitically.
Yeah. Well, the you're right about, I think you were saying earlier, like, who draws the lines? Like, the only way this ends is a bigger stick gets in and draws the lines and says, we're going to punish you if you do the wrong thing. And honestly, I would have hoped that the U.S. would actually respond to some of the bad actions by Israel and say, we're going to sanction you in these ways. We're going to give you less support. Like,
Never.
Condition our support and our relationship on good behavior. And we
should
haven't
have
done
done
that.
that.
And that's an enormous failure
Because
of our foreign policy.
We've rewarded their bad behavior for so many years. They've had no incentive to change.
Exactly. Over and over again.
And it's because of spineless politicians who are scared of being called anti-Semitic. Being anti-radical Zionist does not make you anti-Semitic.
No.
It does not make you anti-Semitic to say that Jewish people don't have the right to upend Arab populations and blockade Arab-controlled areas. They don't have the right to do that.
Yeah, in fact, it makes you anti-Muslim to not say it. That's the issue.
Yeah.
And the issue with that is the reason they don't care is because Americans are so good at hating Muslims.
True.
So it's always in their political best interest, which fucking sucks. And it's less so now, and I will call out that the progressive movement has pushed the Democratic Party to the point of being more pro the Palestinian people than Israel because it's aware of what's going on, which I'm very proud of the Democratic side for doing. But it's only the progressives. And like Biden isn't really progressive enough to even say anything like that.
Listen, Biden isn't terrible on this. but he's by no means great.
Yeah.
By no means.
Yeah.
He wants to send $16 billion to Israel and $100 million for humanitarian aid to Gaza. Give me a break.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess the humanitarian aid is something we should cover real quick. In the past 2 days, there have been trucks, I think about 35 trucks with support materials that have been allowed to go into Gaza from the Sinai Peninsula of Egypt, which is, like, to be clear, a tiny, tiny trickle that is nowhere near what they need. But fortunately, this is a good thing that the U.S. has done, is we have pushed this over and over again, that it needs to be prioritized, that there can be continuous support given to the Gazans.
Totally.
And the door has now opened for that. One thing that is really interesting, one of the biggest questions that came out after this was, how could Israel not know that this was coming?
So true.
Israel's intelligence capabilities are possibly the best in the world because of the position it's been in, right? It's been surrounded by enemies constantly, and it's been given U.S. support, military support, technology support for years and years and years. And so it's been able to build up these defense capacities, which includes its intelligence capabilities. So how is this world-class intelligence organization in Israel unable to know that this attack happened? Well, we can only speculate right now. Maybe the intel was just too general, and because policymakers usually don't respond unless it's extremely specific. Like, this attack is going to happen at this place and at this time, and it's going to be this big, and we have a pulse on that specifically, right? Because tensions are always high between Hamas and Israel. So you need something really
Actionable.
Extreme, yes, to get through the noise. Maybe they didn't have people on the ground there. The idea is that they should have people on the ground, but with tensions rising, anybody who is on the inside is risking not only their own death, but the death of their family.
I want to comment on that, why the people on the ground, right?
Yeah.
So in the West Bank, a lot of Israeli defense forces have to be set up in the West Bank to protect the settlers that they're sending in there. And it diverts a lot of military focus that should be on the Gazan Strip, which is way more militarized.
Yeah, definitely. The signals intelligence might have been ineffective because of false trails from Hamas. The idea is that Hamas talked about how they didn't want to make an attack anytime soon on lines that they knew Israel were listening to because of how they were still reeling from the 2021 kind of battle war that had happened, and that they weren't ready.
Yeah.
And then good operational security always interrupts intelligence operations, right? If Hamas compartmentalized the knowledge so that the paragliders didn't know about the ground invasion, didn't know about the missile attacks that would be happening, it's harder to understand the full scope of the attack that might be coming. So we don't know exactly. I've also heard strong speculation that this is going to lead to the downfall of the Israeli government. You can't have an intelligence failure this bad without getting massive change. Though I wonder if it's just going to further nationalize the people.
I think Netanyahu's gone.
Okay.
I don't think his government's going to get trusted. There's another far-right party that might gain support.
Yeah.
But his party's gone.
Okay.
I don't think that he comes back from this at all. They're all so mad at him. And they should be mad at him.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous that he let this happen.
It's a horrific failure. And so, yeah, then the geopolitical.
Yeah, I want to talk about
repercussions
how like U.S.'s and China and Iran are all related here, because everyone has their hand in this fucking pie.
Yeah. So I think the Iran is like the closest, the most involved. I mean, I guess the U.S. and Iran are kind of similarly involved, but Iran directly funds Hamas. So it's likely that they knew about the attack before it was going to happen.
They've claimed that they didn't.
Yes.
But I don't believe them.
Potentially they sprouted the idea, but again, That's all speculation. They also fund Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, which has similar goals to Hamas in that it seeks the destruction of the Israeli state. So Hezbollah launched rockets into northern Israel when the Hamas attack happened, but they haven't gone in on their own offensive. And I think this is because they're too afraid to go on their own, because Lebanon is already in shambles as a country. More than 80% of the country is below the poverty line. If they incite an attack from Israel like the one that Gaza is currently facing, Hezbollah won't survive, because Hezbollah is only a part of the Lebanese government, unlike Hamas in Gaza.
And Israel can very easily fight a two-front war between Hezbollah and Gaza. I mean, the war against Hezbollah will be way easier than the war against Gaza. War against Gaza will be a slog of urban warfare, fighting for every floor inside of every building. Mm-hmm. Fighting against Hezbollah is fighting in the open field.
Yeah.
That Israel will wipe the floor with them in a second.
Exactly.
If they really wanted to.
Yeah. And then otherwise in the region, you already talked about this, this war totally puts a pause on the negotiations between Israel and Saudi Arabia to normalize relations. Yeah. So that's as far as the region. The U.S., as you can probably already take from what we've been talking about, has been extremely supportive of Israel. The Biden administration has stated repeatedly that this is not a war against the Palestinians. This is a war against Hamas. Their rhetoric is, do not break the rules of war, Israel. That's not okay. We have to try to save as many civilians as possible. I don't think it means anything. I think it's all political bluster.
Yeah.
The U.S. has put carrier groups, aircraft carriers, off the coast in the Red Sea, and intercepted missiles over the Red Sea bound for Israel, launched by the Houthi rebel forces in Yemen, which are
insane. So these Houthi rebel forces are another Iran-backed terrorist group that are fighting Saudi-backed government of Yemen. So, I mean, we have missiles flying in from the south from the Houthis. We have missiles flying in from the north from Hezbollah. We have guys flying in from paragliders from the east, from the west, from Gaza. And, I mean, what would have happened if the carrier group wasn't there? Was those missiles just about to hit Israel?
Maybe. I mean, Iron Dome, maybe.
Yeah, but these missiles are way bigger than, like, what Gaza was shooting at.
Okay.
You know, like, this is like a flying all the way over Saudi Arabia. This isn't like a little pop rocket. You know what I mean?
Okay.
It's a different scale of weaponry here. And it just shows that there is more continuity with Iran's organizations than I initially thought.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, its tendrils really, really reach out far.
There's more continuity than I thought, and they're more of a single organization than I originally gave credit for, I think. I don't know if they're not, I don't think they're all individual actors in which Iran is just helping, because this seems a little more coordinated than that, with the Houthis immediately getting involved a few days later. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
Yeah.
Secretary of State Anthony Blinken went for a visit, and then Biden himself goes a few days later, which is a show that this is a big deal. Like, they care. It does matter that those visits were made. The U.S. announced that they would provide $100 million in humanitarian assistance for Gaza, and as we just discussed, the new bill asks for more humanitarian assistance for Gaza. Those things are very good, because Gaza is a really terrifying and dangerous place to be right now.
Yeah. I want to talk about the hospital bombing again.
Okay.
Because when that hospital was bombed, initially every Western media outlet said 500 plus Palestinians killed from Israeli airstrike. And then once you clicked on the article, it said that was information was given to them by Hamas. Mm-hmm. Now, why would they run that headline? That was terrible media behavior, really bad. And you've listened to this podcast. You heard that we're not some super pro-Israeli people, because we're not. Mm-hmm. But that is extremely irresponsible. And there are other pop news broadcasters on the internet that ran with that story hard and ran with all of these stories being leaked by Hamas exclusively very, very hard. And they're just spreading Hamas propaganda. You can chew gum and walk at the same time, okay? You can sit here and say that Hamas is gross and evil and lies and wants to kill Jews because they're Jews. And you can say that Israel has done a lot of bad things that has made the Palestinians rightfully angry at them. You can say both of those things. But don't be sitting here and just picking the side of Hamas because you're angry at American foreign policy too, okay? Anti-American isn't an ideology. If you're anti-American, you're going to find yourself supporting some really, really bad, gross people sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm finding a lot of left-wing people on the internet are now supporting Hamas in that way because they're just anti-American. And that's as deep as their analysis will go. And there's no reason to do that. You can do both at the same time. You can say both are bad.
And I think even the like deeper idea behind supporting Hamas is like supporting the Palestinian people, and yet they're the ones who are inciting these airstrikes and totally don't care about using the Palestinian population as a human meat shield, right? Like they are just terrible for these Palestinians. That they're the ones who, when they were elected to rule Gaza, ramped up tensions that had been declining for years.
Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense to support Hamas at all. Like, I mean, if you're just going anti-America, it means that you're going to support Al-Qaeda after the 9/11 attacks.
Well, that's what some of them will say, right? Some of them will say that America deserved 9/11 and all that, which is insanity.
Which
is insanity.
No. Just like it's insanity to say that Israel deserved this after what they've done.
Yes.
What they've done is terrible. What some of the things America has done is terrible.
There's no
But
excuses.
perpetuating the cycle of violence is not the answer. That's why we would call for a ceasefire here. There needs to be other solutions.
Yes, I highly agree. Yeah. Really well said.
So yeah, the big picture on the U.S. were very supportive. The one thing Biden said that I did like is, I want to caution Israel from responding really emotionally to this, because that's what we did when we went into Iraq, and it was a terrible decision, and it got a lot of Americans killed.
That was the perfect thing to say.
Yes, it absolutely was. It absolutely was.
The perfect thing to say. And it takes balls.
Yeah.
Because if an American politician said, I know you guys are all angry about 9/11, but don't act on that, he would have gotten kicked out of the country.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The fact that Biden went up and said that, it shows that he has a care for the Palestinian people that a lot of other presidents wouldn't and haven't had.
Definitely.
And it's because of pressure of the progressive movement. It's the pressure of the left wing, not the stupid left wing that's defending Hamas. Forget about them. They're irrelevant, okay? The true left wing that is supporting Palestinian liberation.
Yeah, that cares about the oppressed.
Yes.
In this.
Yes.
That's what matters.
And now,
the last part,
because this is a global chess game, unfortunately,
always,
Russia and China are responding alongside Iran.
Yes.
They're aligning pretty hard with Palestine. And in China specifically, there's a lot of anti-Israeli sentiment. An Israeli ambassador was stabbed over there. There is a lot of anti-Israeli sentiment.
To be honest, like, as far as the chess game, I think they're framing this exactly as they should be. The Chinese foreign minister Wang Yi said, Israel's actions have gone beyond the scope of self-defense. I think I agree. And it called on Israel to stop its, quote, collective punishment of Gaza residents.
I agree.
Yeah, it makes sense. It places them really squarely in opposition to the U.S. in a way that they do kind of look like the good guys.
Yeah.
In Russia, Putin has expressed sympathy for the Palestinians and blamed the U.S. as he said, I think that many people will agree with me that this is a vivid example of the failure of United States policy in the Middle East. And I agree.
And I agree. And that sucks.
Yeah. We have been in a position of power to do something and de-escalate the situation by holding Israel accountable. And we have decided time and time again not to do that. And now we've gotten to a point where we almost can't do anything but support Israel.
Yep.
And we've backed ourselves into this corner. And I still think we should try. And I think we should say, you're killing hundreds of civilians a day. We're going to respond to that. We're going to sanction you. We're not going to send you this aid. I'm going to withdraw billions of dollars from this aid package that I've just suggested to Congress. But we're not doing that.
No.
Because we're scared of looking weak, and we're scared that apologizing and saying we were wrong means we are proving ourselves to be wrong.
Mm-hmm. I think the last thing I'll say is where we go from here. Now, I think a ceasefire needs to happen.
Yeah.
I think that Israel has shown its ability to defend itself. I've read reports that 25% of homes in Gaza are gone. A quarter of the homes are just gone. If that's the case and those reports are accurate, even if it's 15%, okay, I'll give you a 10% confidence interval range, okay? Mm-hmm. If it's 15% of homes in Gaza gone, you made your point.
Yeah.
And we got to come to some sort of agreement here. Hamas needs to be taken out of government fairly, okay? I understand that. And any type of terrorism can't be tolerated. But there has to be a movement towards a two-state solution. And that's the United States position. But is it possible? I don't know if it's possible, which is why it makes me so frustrated.
Yeah.
Because I say, yeah, I want a two-state solution, but it makes me feel like, yeah, I want to see a leprechaun tomorrow.
Yeah. Well, I think that the truth is, like, we work pretty hard and try to learn a lot about the things that we do deep dives on specifically on this show to figure out what we want moving forward, how to solve these problems. I can honestly say this is the first time where I have little to no idea.
Yeah.
Because there needs to be a higher power to draw the lines, but it also isn't okay for those lines to be drawn unilaterally by a higher power without the acceptance of either side or even both sides. I don't know.
The only thing that I know I want going forward is for the killing of children to stop on both sides.
Yeah.
That's the only thing that I know I want to happen. And I wish that was the priority of the American government, but it doesn't look like that's the priority.